Welcome to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilsson. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey, David Nilsson here. I'm the host of this show. Here I connect with business leaders from around the world who have what I like to refer to as a borderless mindset. And this is a place where we can share ideas and innovations, best practices, things that can be used both in your personal and professional life, ultimately helping us grow in a rapidly changing world. Now, this episode is brought to you by Doxa Talent. Doxa helps businesses to find full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world. And as a result, these companies can scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. The most common roles that they fill are things from virtual assistants, finance professionals, sales and service, even software engineers. And to learn more about Doxa, you can go to doxatalent.com. All right, for our show, I'm excited for today. Raazi Imam is the general partner with Unlock Ventures, a seed stage fund focused on helping new entrepreneurs sort of launch and scale their businesses. Before Unlock, Raazi was the CEO and chairman of the board for Cayman Consulting, which was a management consulting firm he founded in 2004 and was eventually acquired in 2019. Today, he is a senior mentor at Stanford's StartX Incubator. And Raazi has a degree in management, information systems, and finance from the University of Texas. Go Longhorns. And he started his career in mutual fund trading before moving to management consulting with Arthur Andersen and Hitachi. And along the way, he's advised some smaller companies like Google and Facebook, Microsoft, eBay, even Capital One. So Raazi, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, David. I'm excited to speak to you.
Yeah, it'll be fun to sort of jump into your journey here. Now, as I introduced you, I was talking that you've obviously started your career consulting with some obviously very big companies. But I'd be curious to know, what was the moment when you started consulting that you realized that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and sort of decided to take that leap into business for yourself?
Yeah, I was living in Seattle. It was 2003. And one of my good friends at the time, Greg Long, and I were on this project where we were Microsoft was sending us all over Asia to help them roll out a product. And we were like, I think we could do this without the big company name and the brand, because there's a subset of work that even these big companies need to get done on a local level. So what if we started a company that was focused on helping local consultants work with big enterprise companies and helping them solve their business problems? And that was kind of the genesis for Cayman Consulting. The other thing that we really thought we could do is, the culture at these big companies, it's like a machine, right? You're just a small cog in a massive wheel. And we thought, hey, could we make consulting, take it back and make it a little bit more human, a little bit more personable? Yeah. And so Greg was in LA, I was in San Francisco. We both moved up to Seattle, started this firm, Cayman Consulting, and that's how we kind of got off the ground. Is we went and begged Microsoft to allow us to consult with them, and here we are. It's been a minute.
That was the sales strategy. Go beg Microsoft. Were they your anchor client? Was that the sort of how you sort of cut your teeth initially?
They were. We had consulted with them through the big firms that we had been at. So we understood the ecosystem, the market. The part we were sensitive about was we didn't want to steal the companies that we had worked for as business. So the hard part for us was neither Greg or I were partners at the time. We were middle management at these big firms. It was, how do we walk into Microsoft and convince them to go hire two guys that have a good consulting background but have nobody else on their team? And so, it took Greg about 3-4 months to pull it off, and I got lucky and I did it in like 2 or 3 weeks. But that was the challenge.
I love that. So you guys were sort of swimming around you were actually working directly for this larger consulting firm. You decided to move out, but one of the sort of, call it values or principles you guys had was do no harm, right?
Yeah, we wanted to make sure we were doing business ethically. We weren't stealing some other consulting firm's business. We just didn't think that was the right way to start a new business. So which meant we had to quit our jobs with nothing in our hands, go kind of tin cup and find the first client. And it was kind of scary, but it was kind of exciting. We were also young, dumb, and blessed. So, that made it easier.
Sometimes that ignorance is helpful. By the way, I love that. We, obviously we're in the business of helping companies to find talent internationally. And one of the big risks that you find there is that if people do well, then they'll want to eliminate jobs in the US in favor of the cost arbitrage that they could potentially gain. And we've actually made that clear that that's not the type of business that we want to work with, because we don't want to do harm along the way. So I love that, because that was your philosophy. Cayman, you guys ran that for approximately 15 years and then sold it. I'd love to hear about, most of the time people tell the stories, the good stuff, right? They always tell you like, oh, it was so fun. We've got this great business. We had the successful exit. But I'd love to hear if there were any moments along the way that you felt like you had your back up against the wall or really pressed to make some tough decisions. And what was that like?
Yeah, there was a moment, there was many moments, but there's one that, it comes to mind. We were in the process of, we had hired an investment bank to help us facilitate the process. And, there were a number of companies that wanted to acquire us. Some wanted to buy us. Some wanted to sort of co-merge with us. And there was this moment where a portion of our leadership team was like, we shouldn't do this. Like, we have a great culture. We're going to be fine. And it was basically this sort of like, my vision was for us to grow and scale the business, we needed to have a bigger company to work with that could help us go global, as opposed to me trying to go global and go work in Germany or Singapore or wherever. And so it was this moment where it was like, oh my God, like if this doesn't work out, I'm going to rip the team apart. And so there was a lot of quiet and some tears and some just getting people aligned again and saying, look, this is the future, we think. And thankfully, we closed our deal in November of 2019. COVID happened in March of 2021. So, thankfully for me, they looked at it in March and they were like, wow, this was a good thing we did, right?
Yeah, very good timing.
Yeah.
It is funny though, I can imagine so many people thinking, my understanding, at least my belief, is that people stay at companies because they feel like they're growing and developing as people and professionals, but they also feel really connected to the culture. And so when they can see around the corner, hey, things are about to change, and you never really know what's going to happen. That can be really scary for a lot of people. So
yeah,
very interesting. What was it like for you though? I mean, here you've had this baby for 15 years and you then, you sign the paperwork, transaction close. Certainly it's, a life-changing event in one way, shape or form, but emotionally, how did you deal with that? I know a lot of people that have sold their business and their identity is tied so closely to it that they sort of feel a little bit lost. What was your experience in that?
Yeah, I definitely felt that, like what you're saying. Sounds like maybe it's come from a place that you understand really well. But, it felt, there was this moment a few months after the transaction closed, David, where, I realized what, this isn't my baby anymore. And I'm really a custodian of the acquiring firm. In this case, it was called Thea Partners. I'm a custodian of their business in this new market that they want me to own and manage and run. So it was a bit of a relief, I think, once it sunk in, because it changed the way I thought about things. I didn't approach everything with a defensive manner from then on. It was more like, oh, you know what? This is their business. Let's see if that works. Let's see if that recommendation they have or if that approach they want to take works. And it was an important shift because SIA historically has acquired a lot of businesses, and that's part of their growth strategy. And so I've also seen since then, this is 2+ years now, other founders not make that shift, and it'd be very painful for them once they've been acquired because they still want to hold on.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not your company anymore.
Yeah, that's got to be a really hard transition for a lot of people. I try to think about what that'd be like for me if I were to be acquired from a larger firm and then have to go effectively be an executive inside of that when you're used to calling the shots and it's about, you're a little bit more sort of in the driver's seat. That's a big shift.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about today. So you're obviously a GP at Unlock Ventures. And in full disclosure, for those of our listeners, I am one of the limited partners in that fund. But tell me a little bit about why it made sense as that sort of being the next phase for you and your career is just to start a fund.
Yeah. So, the other two partners, Andy and Sanjay, and I have been angel investors and had been angel investors for a long time. And so, what that means is, we see interesting deals in the market and we put in 10, 15, 20, 50, $100,000 into these startups. and we hope and pray that they go well. And in like 2015, 2016, we realized, hey, you know what? That is not a winning strategy, because you have zero, so you can provide zero support to these startups, because it's not your job. You're not really putting enough capital behind it. You don't have enough of an equity position. You're not taking a board seat. And so we decided to go raise a fund, our first fund, and do it properly. And in the process, there were a bunch of things we had learned, both being entrepreneurs as well as angel investors, that we thought would be valuable. And so that combination is sort of what got us interested in raising a fund, starting a fund, and then going and investing. We're like 38 companies into our portfolio now, in between Fund 1 and Fund 2. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. Well, and what's the investment thesis? Like when you guys are thinking about which investments to make, what's the sort of filter that you put on that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we're very founder focused. So we have to really believe in the CEO, and usually the CEO and maybe the small core team. We're investing at the pre-seed seed stage. So there's, 1, 2, 3 people at the table. We really have to believe in that CEO. And so if the CEO comes to us referred, or perhaps they were somebody we knew in our network, that obviously helps. But we go through a pretty significant diligence process in understanding that CEO. And that's really, really important to us. And that's really important to pre-seed seed companies, because you're really betting on that individual and perhaps 1 or 2 other people on their team to determine the success. Because inevitably, whatever you're investing in is going to change, right? The model, the product market fit, the product, the market. And so if you have a great CEO that has experience and can build and lead a team and get you through some of those difficult inflection points, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I remember early on in my career, one of my mentors told me that once you write a business plan, it's wrong. And so I can appreciate why it would be important to believe that the CEO is going to be able to figure it out if the right market, if you've got the right sort of general direction, because we know that no matter what's put on that initial investment presentation, it's going to change over time.
Yep. The second thing I would mention is, we like investing in, it's all tech investments, and we like investing in companies that are thinking about data and AI and how they build their products. So that's also pretty important to us, because we feel like data is the valuable asset in the future. And if we're investing in companies that are thinking about that, and they have proprietary data sets, or they're using data for monetization or data for helping segment customers, et cetera, we think that's something unique, and that's going to be something that's going to have longevity. So,
yeah. Now, was that the original thesis from the get-go, that data and AI, or has that evolved as well?
No, that was the original thesis from the very beginning, is we wanted to invest in really, really top-tier CEOs, data. And then the third piece, which we stuck to as well, is we like investing in markets where we have some, I'll call it an unfair advantage. In other words, we have a really good understanding of the entrepreneurs. We have a good understanding of the other partners, for example, educational institutions, startups, incubators. And so for us, those 2 markets are really Seattle and LA. We know those markets pretty well. So that's where we exclusively. Yeah.
Are you able to share any of the companies that you've invested in, or some of the outcomes that you're excited about in the portfolio?
Yeah, we've had 5 exits so far. I'll share one. We had a company just a few months ago that, I can't probably share that one because the deal hasn't totally closed. But I'll share an example of a company that we really like, that we just invested in Fund 2. We invested in a company called Unreal Labs, which is think esports meets crypto meets blockchain, and they're building a really world-class game. And the founder is a former head of Microsoft Ventures and a longtime crypto gamer himself. And so in that situation, we've invested with some pretty big name other institutional investors as well. So we're excited about what these guys are doing and kind of where they're taking that business.
Awesome. Tell me, you were talking about this a second ago. I think this is an interesting opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the other side, right? So you guys are typically the ones stroking the checks and deciding whether this is an investment that you want to move into. But being a startup founder sounds really sexy, but it is a lot of work because the individual is both chief cook and bottle washer, oftentimes moving into a market they may have some expertise in, but oftentimes just saw sort of an opportunity. When you think about like looking at that startup founder, you made the comment that a big part of the investment decision is on your belief that they're going to be able to sort of figure it out. Like, are there any sort of attributes that you've seen for the startup founders that sort of help them be successful?
Yeah, sure. Significant depth in the space, either that they have it or people on their team have it, have been an entrepreneur, ideally in the past, so that they don't have to make the same mistakes around people and operations and other things. Grit is an important characteristic we find, right? Because they're going to have to pivot and make changes and adjust. A really strong aptitude and sort of curiosity to learn and consume information and pivot quickly. Really, really important characteristic. And for us, like, these are things that either we are sort of measuring analytically when we're going through the diligence process. We're also talking to their previous employers and other people in our network passively to understand if they've actually done that and it can be proven, because everybody interviews well, right? Nobody's going to go to an interview and tell you that they suck at anything typically. So there's a lot of data points that we're kind of pulling together to sort of get that full view of that entrepreneur.
Is there anything that comes to mind when I ask you? I mean, the easy answer is obviously the inverse of some of these things that you've talked about. But what are the one or two things that you most commonly, or reasons you most commonly would pass on investment and opportunity?
If one thing that gives us pause, I wouldn't say we would necessarily pass, but one thing that gives us pause is if we feel like the entrepreneur can't raise money. And that's one that probably, if you're not in the investment world, wouldn't realize. But like, do they have the ability? Do they have that? You meet some people and you just get a vibe and an energy, and that you connect, and there's a level of comfort you get or a level of confidence that individual builds in you. If they don't have that, it gives us some pause about whether we should make the investment, irrespective of how amazing maybe the space is or what the startup is doing. Because at the end of the day, they're the tip of the spear. They're the ones that are the face of that business. And if they can't close deals and they can't convince investors to buy into their dream, like, it's going to be hard for us.
Yeah, and if you guys are pre-seed or at the seed stage, like, you're early in the transaction, right? A lot of the success of your future investment depends on their ability to bring on more capital to help scale faster, right?
That's right. And even though we will introduce them to later stage funds, if they can't close those deals, we've got a problem. Mm-hmm. So that's an important thing we look at.
Yeah. You alluded a few minutes ago, you alluded to the fact that you guys started the fund because you wanted to play a more active role or be able to contribute value in different ways. Outside of providing capital, which is the obvious one, what are some of the things that you guys do to sort of help, and bolster the success of your portfolio companies?
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of coaching and mentoring. So we have people on our team that will help with things like pitch decks and positioning in the market, those kind of things. We get involved in helping close commercial deals quite a bit. So Andy, Sanjay, and I have a pretty good network, whether it's in the enterprise space or in the media or maybe just in the banking and whatever it is, whatever the space is. So if we can help connect a startup entrepreneur to a company that they want to, a buyer or a service provider, whatever it is, we'll do that. Sometimes it's recruiting. We'll help them with recruiting, recruiting the right talent, CRO, a CIO, a CEO, a VP of marketing, whatever it is. So because all three of us come from being entrepreneurs ourselves, we're not the sit back and let them just do their thing. We're like, what can we do to help you? Right? What can we do if we had to roll up our sleeves and get in there with you a little bit more? So we can help activate things or get them over a hump. Like, we want to be involved in doing that.
Yeah. What about, on the flip side? So this is the way that you guys are contributing value. But if I was raising capital today, let's hope that I've got more than one person who's willing to invest in the business. Like, if you were advising an entrepreneur, maybe you weren't in the transaction, so you're objective on this particular one. Like, what are the questions that they should be asking of potential investors to, help them effectively choose a long-term partner?
Yeah. So I think one of them is what you just asked about is some entrepreneurs don't want investors to be very actively involved. Some of them do. Some entrepreneurs feel like they really know the space and they have an ecosystem. They just want the money. So they would just want money. capital. Other entrepreneurs want a seat at the table from an investor, or whether it's a board seat or a board observer seat. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. And so I think if you're an entrepreneur, like, you need to be really thoughtful about who you're bringing to the table. Sometimes investors are great investors, but they're terrible board members. Sometimes they're disengaged. Sometimes they can just be frankly downright rude and difficult. So I think that's important. Also, certain funds and certain members of those funds have access to certain commercial relationships and other things too. So I think if I'm an entrepreneur, I really need to think about strategically what I need to help my business be successful, and what are the key elements to that, and who should I bring to the table, whether it's an angel investor, an institutional investor, whoever it is, to help me accomplish that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important relationship. Speaking of which, your first business came in, you had a business partner. Now in this operation, you've got three of you, I should say two business partners. Like, what's the key to making partnerships work? Because often people are launching businesses with somebody else, and that can be both. I've seen a lot of these erode over time, and I've seen some be very successful. What's sort of the advice that you have?
Yeah, I would say it's transparency and communication, right? You and that individual start on a journey at the same time, really aligned, and then over time, people's interests and desires and direction changes, and if those two individuals are transparent and communicate well, they can figure all that out. If they don't, I think that's where problems happen. Maybe the third thing is trust, which kind of comes from being transparent and having good communication. But I think that's the difference. It's been a journey for us too, because Greg and I had known each other and worked together for quite some time. Andy, Sanjay, and I had known each other, worked together for quite some time. So we kind of had a chance to know how we are and what makes us strong and where our blind spots are. And I think as I've gotten older, and as they've gotten older too, there's a lot less ego at the table. It's more about being focused on the business. And in this case, in the fund business, it's helping our entrepreneurs be successful. And so that part's nice. That part's nice, that there isn't as much ego on the table, and we can really just sort of get past that and just focus on the actual business and doing the right things.
Yeah. And how do you guys divvy up your roles? When you first started there, how did you think about who's going to drive what pieces of the business? Because my experience, also had partners in every business I've done, is clarity makes a big difference.
Yeah. And as you probably also know, David, that changes. Yeah. What you focus on depends on the stage of the business, what your strengths are, what the business needs, et cetera. So for the fund, for example, Sanjay's in LA, Andy's in Seattle, and I'm in SF. And so I'll give you an example. One of the things that is part of my charter being in San Francisco is building those relationships with these later stage funds. So when our seed stage companies are ready for an A round or a B round investment, I happen to sit in the market where there's 1,000 A and B stage funds sitting here. So what am I doing to help our portfolio companies get access to that capital at the next round? And so that's a good example of being in a certain location and having a slightly different charter than the other two.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you guys positioned yourself right outside of that sort of what I would call crowded space, which is your Series A, Series B, those types of organizations. You're building relationships with them so that, in the future, you can help the entrepreneur gain access to their capital. But do you ever find that they're also a referral source for deal flow because somebody comes to them too early and they're sending them upstream? That's
right. That's exactly. It works exactly that way, both directions. These A and B stage funds, sometimes entrepreneurs will come to them and be like, and they'll be like, oh, you're too early. Go talk to Unlock.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that are investing. And as a matter of fact, we also have an incubator as part of our thesis in our fund, which, we're investing at not even the pre-seed, we're investing at the ideation stage sometimes, right? So we'll have startup founders that are helping ideate and build a product with us. And we're funding that just to see if that's something we want to do and actually spin out into a company. So absolutely, these later stage funds will definitely send us some interesting deals from time to time as well that we look at, which helps us with our deal flow.
Very cool. Well, I have to ask a selfish question because, I mentioned this as we started the podcast. My belief is that we're sort of living through this fundamental transformation in the way that we work and live. And I talk about it as a borderless mindset, but obviously I run a borderless talent business. the market is super, I should say the ability to access talent right now is a lot tighter than it has been historically. And that's just evolving as people are saying, we're going to work in an office. We're not going to work in an office. We're going to be a hybrid environment. We're going to run offshore, onshore, nearshore. Like, how do you guys think about talent strategy inside your portfolio companies? And how are you, sort of helping them navigate this environment?
Yeah, a couple interesting trends, I would say. One, more and more, the idea of having offshore engineering and offshore development is becoming a reality. And so if, as a matter of fact, I would say if engineering isn't diversified and there isn't an offshore component to it, we feel like, our portfolio entrepreneurs aren't thinking about it the right way. You want to have a hybrid model of engineering talent being local as well as offshore. So I think that's important. It's one of the things that's been challenging for us in sort of thinking borderless is when we're actually evaluating these entrepreneurs, we like to meet with them in person. We like to go to their offices. And that part's been hard for us as we've invested through COVID because we can't do that. And so we're kind of excited to be able to go back and do that. As a matter of fact, I was on a call this morning where we really like this entrepreneur, but we're not going to probably make an investment until we go visit with him directly in person, face to face. And that's sort of part of, like, I would say Andy, Sanjay, and I's superpowers at Unlock is, each of us brings our own experience to this conversation. Yeah. And so we always leave with having gotten back different things from that entrepreneur and that team. And that helps us make, I think, a more balanced, educated decision on whether we want to make that investment or not. So, like, the borderless thing is real and it's happening, but then there's also this like core fundamental, like, hey, we really need to meet with these people before we write $1 million plus check and make sure we really understand who they are and what they're about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how it evolves over the next, call it 2 to 3 years. I think there's been a lot of grace given to companies in a totally online environment because COVID was happening. But now as, that's starting to, come back to what I would call a more normal place and people are getting called back into work. It's going to be curious to see how that sort of all evolves because my experience has been that from a productivity standpoint, being remote, it's exceptional. Collaboration is the place where there's still a lot of room for improvement. So it'll be fun to see how that happens. Raazi, we're getting to the end of our call here, but just last question for you is really, you've been an entrepreneur, now you're an investor. Do you foresee a time where you might jump back in and say, I'm ready to get my hands dirty and I'm going to, be that leading CEO again?
I think about it all the time because we see these companies all the time. And, all of us, like, deep down in our core, love growing and building businesses. It's possible. I'm not wanting to do it today, but I would never say never, right? There might be the right opportunity at the right time with the right folks that I might jump back in and do another startup. It's entirely possible. It's in our DNA and, like, it feeds us, right? We love it. So yeah. Probably, yeah.
Can't take the entrepreneur out of the individual. I love it. Well, we've been talking to Raazi Imam, who's a general partner for Unlock Ventures. Raazi, if people want to learn more about you and what you do, where can they go?
So you can go to unlockvp.com, or you can reach out to me as well at Raazi@unlockvp.com. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for having me. It was awesome talking to you, and, best of luck to you on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilsson. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.